The Roman-Germanic Wars involved Germanic tribes fighting the Roman Empire across what's now Germany. They started when the Cimbri, possibly forced from the Jutland Peninsula by disaster around 120 BC, moved south with the Teutons and Ambrones. Together they inflicted some of Rome's worst defeats since Hannibal at Arausio and Norea before being destroyed at Aquae Sextiae and Verchalle, where Roman cavalry surrounded and annihilated them. Soon after, Julius Caesar's conquest of Gaul brought him into conflict with tribes like the Suebi, with the Rhine becoming the frontier between Roman and Germanic lands. Under Augustus, Roman generals pushed east of the Rhine until in 9 AD, Arminius of the Cherusci ambushed and destroyed 3 Roman legions in the Teutoburg forest, halting Rome's expansion into Germania. Later conflicts erupted along the Danube, Rome's northeastern European border. The Marcomannic Wars saw invasions by Marcomanni, Quadi, Lombards, Goths, Sarmatians and others, which Rome eventually repelled. In 376 AD, the arrival of the Goths fleeing the Huns triggered another crisis. Famine and poor treatment by Roman officials led to revolt, culminating in Rome's crushing defeat at Adrianople in 378. From the 4th century onward, Germanic incursions steadily undermined Rome's borders. The eventual settlement of these tribes inside the empire and their invasions accelerated the collapse of the Western Roman Empire. The Frisian Frankish Wars took place during the 7th and 8th centuries, centered on control of the Rhine Delta. Early on, the Germanic Frisians resisted expansion from their Frankish neighbors, but after the death of their king, Redbad, their power declined. In 734, the Frisians were decisively defeated at the Battle of the Bourne, and the Franks annexed major territory. The Frisians east of the Lauwers River held out longer, but by 772 they too lost their independence. The final revolt came in 793, after which Charlemagne subdued the region completely, bringing the Frisian kingdom under Frankish control. The Saxon Wars involved Charlemagne wage 18 campaigns to conquer Saxony and convert its people to Christianity. The conflict began after Saxon raiders struck northeastern Francia, prompting Charlemagne to invade and destroy the Irminsul, their central pagan shrine, showing his intent to dominate Saxony rather than just punish raids. The Saxons resisted fiercely, rising in repeated rebellions under their leader Widukind, who later fled to Denmark for refuge. Charlemagne imposed harsh laws in the conquered regions, making pagan practices a capital crime and enforcing mass baptisms. In 782, Widukind returned to lead a major revolt, defeating a Frankish army at the Battle of Süntel, which sparked 2 years of brutal fighting. Charlemagne responded with mass executions at the Blood Court of Verden, where over 4,000 Saxons were beheaded. The turning point came in 785, when Widukind surrendered, was baptized and swore loyalty to Charlemagne. Though smaller uprisings continued until 804, Charlemagne relaxed some of his harsher policies and Saxony was fully absorbed into the Frankish realm, its people forced from pagan traditions into Christianity. The Swabian War was the last major conflict between the Old Swiss Confederacy and the Austrian Habsburg dynasty. It began as a dispute over control of areas in the Graubünden canton, but escalated when both sides called in allies. The Habsburgs were backed by the German Swabian League, while the Swiss Confederation was backed financially by the French crown. From January to July, the war spread through the Rhine Valley to Lake Constance and southern Alsace. The Swiss, hardened from the Burgundian Wars, repeatedly defeated Swabian and Habsburg's forces, suffering from poor coordination, distrust between knights and infantry, and low enthusiasm for a war seen as serving Habsburg interests rather than the empire. The decisive clash came at Dornach, where the Swiss victory killed the imperial commander, forcing Emperor Maximilian I to accept peace at Basel in September, which cemented Swiss independence. The fighting was devastating, with around 200 villages burned, some 20,000 killed in the first half of the year, and further losses from famine and plague. The Great Peasants War was the largest popular uprising in German-speaking Europe before the 19th century, fueled by economic hardship, religious upheaval and resentment of noble privilege. Its causes ranged from high rents and bad harvests to the peasants' desire to secure their own rights, plus freedom from oppression. It began in Württemberg, when about 1,200 peasants gathered, rejecting serfdom as unbiblical and demanding reforms like elected clergy and fairer use of taxes. The revolt quickly spread across southern and central Germany, Alsace, and into Austria. The peasants, poorly armed and lacking leadership, rose against nobles and cities, sometimes with brutal violence such as the Weinsberg massacre, where nobles were executed by rebels. The nobility responded with overwhelming force under commanders like Georg Truchsess von Waldburg, the scourge of the peasants. His Swabian League army crushed the peasants in battle after battle, Leipheim, Königshofen, and especially Böblingen in May 1525, where thousands were slaughtered. At Frankenhausen, a truce was broken and the rebels were massacred, ending large-scale resistance. Up to 100,000 peasants were killed. Survivors faced harsh reprisals. The rebellion achieved virtually none of its goals. The Schmalkaldic Wars were fought inside the Holy Roman Empire between Emperor Charles V and the Protestant Schmalkaldic League. Rooted in the Reformation, it was a struggle both over religion and imperial authority, as many princes saw conversion to Lutheranism as a way to strengthen their independence against Habsburg power. The Schmalkaldic League, formed in 1531 as a defensive alliance of Protestant states and cities, eventually clashed with the emperor after tensions rose over Catholic opposition. Fighting began in Swabia in 1546, when Protestant forces seized the Catholic town of Füssen. Poor planning weakened the League, while Charles, backed by Bavaria and Habsburg Austria, rallied a strong army with Spanish and Italian troops. The turning point came at the Battle of Mühlberg in April 1547, where Charles crushed the League and captured its leading princes. Resistance lingered in Bremen and Magdeburg, but the war was effectively over. A renewed conflict broke out in 1552 when Protestant forces, this time led by Maurice of Saxony, forced Charles into retreat. The Peace of Augsburg in 1555 ended the war, which recognized Lutheranism as a legal faith within the empire. The 30 Years' War was one of Europe's most destructive conflicts, fought mainly in the Holy Roman Empire, with Germany bearing the brunt of devastation. Its spark came in 1618 with the Bohemian Revolt, when Protestant nobles threw two Catholic officials from a window of Prague Castle because they rejected Catholic Emperor Ferdinand II. Ferdinand crushed the uprising at the Battle of White Mountain in 1620, but the conflict widened as Protestant states sought foreign aid against the Catholic Habsburg alliance. Christian IV of Denmark entered in 1625 but was decisively defeated by imperial commanders Wallenstein and Tilly, leading to the Treaty of Lübeck. In 1630, Gustavus Adolphus of Sweden invaded with French financial backing, scoring major victories at Breitenfeld and Rhein before his death in 1632. Swedish forces remained strong until their crushing defeat at Nördlingen in 1634, which shifted momentum back to the Habsburgs. The Peace of Prague in 1635 ended much of the Protestant resistance inside the empire, but France soon entered the war directly, turning the conflict into a wider struggle against Habsburg power. From 1635 to 48, France and Sweden fought alongside German allies like Saxony against the Habsburg Empire and Spain, with battles raging across Central Europe. Villages burned while famine and plague ravaged Germany. Some regions lost up to half their population, and an estimated 4.5 to 8 million people died. Peace only came with the 1648 Treaties of Westphalia. The agreements granted independence to the Dutch Republic and Switzerland, secured greater autonomy for German states like Saxony and Bavaria, and once again confirmed Lutheranism as a legal faith. The end of the war ushered in an era where politics and secularism ruled. The 7 Years' War was a global conflict, but in Germany it centered on the rivalry between Prussia and Austria. Frederick the Great sought to keep Prussia's Silesia, seized from Austria earlier, while Maria Theresa, ruler of the Habsburg monarchy, aimed to win it back. The diplomatic landscape shifted dramatically in what became known as the Diplomatic Revolution. Britain allied with Prussia to secure Hanover, while Austria drew support from France and Russia. The war began with Frederick's invasion of Saxony in 1756, forcing its army to surrender and conscripting its soldiers into Prussian service. territories. He pressed into Bohemia, but his defeat at Kolin in 1757 ended hopes of a quick victory. Prussia was then surrounded by enemies. Russians pushed into East Prussia, the French invaded Hanover, and Austrians struck Silesia. Despite this, Frederick secured two of his greatest victories, routing the French and Austrians at Rossbach and crushing the Austrians at Leuthen with his famous oblique attack, but the fighting raged on. Battles such as Zorndorf in 1758 against Russia and Kunersdorf in 1759, where Frederick lost 18,000 men, pushed Prussia to the brink. Berlin was occupied and Frederick often fought against forces 2 or 3 times larger than his own. His survival depended on British subsidies and on enemy mistakes, as Austria, Russia and France often failed to coordinate their offensives. By 1760, Prussia's manpower and economy were exhausted, yet Frederick continued to win hard-fought battles, including Torgau. The situation changed dramatically in 1762 when Russia's new Tsar, Peter III, who admired Frederick, withdrew from the war and returned occupied territories. Catherine II's coup ended the alliance, but she did not rejoin the fight. With Russia gone, Frederick pushed back the Austrians at Burkersdorf, and Prince Henry won the last major battle at Freiberg. The Treaty of Hubertusburg in 1763 restored the pre-war borders, but crucially confirmed Prussia's control of Silesia. The outcome established Prussia as a great power in Europe. The Napoleonic Wars reshaped Germany more than almost any other European region. After Napoleon's victory at Austerlitz in 1805 and Austria's defeat in the War of the Third Coalition, the Peace of Pressburg gave him dominance in Central Europe. In 1806, he forced 16 German states into the Confederation of the Rhine, a French-controlled alliance that effectively dissolved the Holy Roman Empire. Napoleon then annexed parts of northwest Germany and required the supply of troops, turning most of Germany into a French puppet. Prussia's defeat at Jena-Auerstedt in 1806 and Russia's at Friedland in 1807 confirmed French dominance, but resentment grew. Prussia introduced sweeping military and administrative reforms, while the wider German population developed a stronger sense of nationalism under foreign rule. After Napoleon's disastrous Russian campaign in 1812, German resistance grew into the War of Liberation in 1813. The turning point came at the Battle of Leipzig in October 1813, where Austria, Prussia, Russia and Sweden decisively defeated Napoleon. Most German states then defected, and the Confederation collapsed. Later, at the Battle of Waterloo, Prussian forces under Blücher struck Napoleon's flank, securing his final defeat. The experience of resisting French domination and fighting together in decisive battles laid the foundation for future unification efforts. The Austro-Prussian War was a struggle for dominance in Central Europe between the Austrian Empire and the rising power of Prussia, each supported by various German allies, with Prussia also securing an alliance with Italy. King Wilhelm I and his Prime Minister Otto von Bismarck sought to establish Prussian leadership within the German Confederation, while Emperor Franz Joseph I aimed to preserve Austrian influence. Tensions escalated after disputes over the jointly administered Holstein. Bismarck secured Italy's support with the promise of Venetia, and when Austria mobilized, Prussia invaded Hanover, Hesse and Saxony on June 15th, while Italy declared war 5 days later. The Austrian commander, Ludwig Benedek, proved indecisive, allowing Prussia to gain the advantage despite being outnumbered. The decisive clash came at the Battle of Königgrätz. Austria fielded 215,000 men against 124,000 Prussians, but the superior Prussian needle gun gave their infantry a major edge over Austria's muzzle loaders. Initial Austrian resistance stalled Prussian advances, but once the Crown Prince's Second Army arrived, the Austrian lines collapsed, leading to heavy casualties and retreat. The Peace of Prague was signed on August 23rd. Bismarck restrained Prussia's demands, leaving Austria intact to avoid long-term hostility, but the empire lost Schleswig-Holstein, Hanover, Hesse and its dominance in German affairs. The war dissolved the German Confederation, replacing it with the Prussia-led North German Confederation, excluding Austria and southern German states. The conflict confirmed Prussia's ascendancy in Central Europe, marked the decline of Austrian influence among German states, and paved the way for German unification under Prussian leadership. The Franco-Prussian War was fought between the Second French Empire under Napoleon III, Napoleon Bonaparte's nephew, and the North German Confederation led by Prussia, joined by Bavaria, Württemberg, Baden, and Hesse-Darmstadt. The war stemmed from France's fear of losing its dominance in Europe after Prussia's victory over Austria in 1866 and the creation of the North German Confederation. Napoleon III demanded territorial concessions, including Luxembourg, Saarland, and the Bavarian Palatinate, which Bismarck refused. The immediate spark came when France objected to Leopold of Hohenzollern-Sigmaringen's candidacy for the Spanish throne, fearing a Spain-Prussia alliance, and demanding Prussia renounce any future claims. Chancellor Otto von Bismarck quickly made this public with a telegram to Berlin. Some say he phrased it in such a provocative way as to make France's demand sound like an ultimatum, and a French press mistranslation amplified the outrage. Soon, a crowd in the streets of Paris demanded war. France mobilized in July 1870 and launched its first attack at Saarbrücken on August 2nd. But German forces under Helmut von Moltke had already prepared superior logistics, maps, and railways, allowing them to concentrate 3 armies against the French. On August 4th, the Germans invaded northeastern France, defeating French forces at Wissembourg, then winning a string of battles with superior artillery and infantry tactics. At Sedan in September, Napoleon III and his army were surrounded and forced to surrender, ending the Second Empire. A new French government continued resistance, and German forces besieged Paris until it surrendered in January 1871. During the war, Wilhelm I was proclaimed German Emperor at Versailles, marking the unification of Germany under Prussian leadership. The Treaty of Frankfurt in May 1871 imposed heavy reparations on France and ceded Alsace and parts of Lorraine to the new German Empire. World War I saw Germany at the center of one of the deadliest conflicts in history. From the German perspective, the war began as a defensive struggle against encirclement by hostile powers. The assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand triggered Austria-Hungary's war with Serbia, bringing in Russia and, by alliance, Germany. Germany declared war on Russia and France, who had an alliance, then invaded neutral Belgium, who denied true passage, on 3rd of August to implement the Schlieffenplan, a strategy meant to quickly defeat France before turning east. Britain entered the war the next day in response to the violation of Belgium's neutrality. Germany's early victories on both fronts, including Tannenberg against invading Russians, were overshadowed by the failure to break through in France at the Marne in September 1914. The Western Front hardened into trench warfare with years of stalemate and appalling conditions. Germany held firm but faced increasing pressure from the Allied naval blockade, which caused shortages and famine at home. Germany attempted to negotiate peace on multiple occasions, most notably in late 1916, when it was in a strong position and not an inch of German territory had been occupied. These efforts were ignored by the Allies, and another attempt in 1918 was also rejected. Despite temporary relief from Russia's withdrawal in 1917, Germany could not force a decision in the West. The unrestricted German submarine campaign drew the United States into the war, while the Zimmermann telegram, sent to Mexico proposing a military alliance against the United States if the US entered World War I, worsened tensions further. The 1918 spring offensive briefly broke the deadlock, but left the German army exhausted. The Allied 100 Days Offensive then pushed German forces into retreat. By late 1918, Germany's allies collapsed one by one, revolution spread at home, and Kaiser Wilhelm II abdicated. The armistice of November 11th ended the fighting. The Treaty of Versailles in 1919 imposed heavy reparations, territorial losses, and strict military limits on Germany. Several million Germans ended up stranded outside of the German Empire. Although the German army had not been decisively defeated on its own soil, leaders like Hindenburg and Ludendorff claimed the nation had been stabbed in the back from within by political unrest and Marxist union leaders. World War II was deeply rooted in Germany's resentment over the Treaty of Versailles, which had stripped Germany of 13% of its territory, all overseas colonies, and severely restricted its military, while also imposing crushing reparations. The humiliation, combined with hyperinflation and the economic depression following the 1929 stock market crash, created fertile ground for Adolf Hitler and his party. By the early 1930s, the National Socialist Party had become a mass movement, feeding on nationalism, anger over territorial losses, and promises to restore German strength. Once in power, Hitler spoke of peace in 1933, stating that Germany would disarm if other European nations reciprocated. The proposal was rejected since it wasn't deemed as sincere. Germany reunited with Austria in 1938, secured the Sudetenland in Czechoslovakia through the Munich Agreement, and then demanded the return of the isolated German city Danzig. When Poland refused, Hitler signed a non-aggression pact with the Soviet Union, secretly agreeing to divide Poland and much of Eastern Europe. On the 1st of September 1939, Germany invaded Poland, using border violations as a pretext. Britain and France declared war 2 days later. France launched an attack into the Saarland on the 7th of September 1939 in support of Poland, but it was small and soon halted. German forces overwhelmed Poland in under a month through fast-moving combined arms tactics later called Blitzkrieg. In April 1940, the Allies planned steps to choke German iron supplies from Sweden. Britain then violated Norwegian neutrality by mining Norwegian waters in Operation Wilfred to block ore shipments and discussed bases in Denmark and Norway. Germany responded with Operation Weserübung, partly a preemptive move to secure Norway's ports and the iron route. Denmark fell in hours. Norway held out longer, but key ports and airfields were seized quickly. In May, Germany launched its western offensive, bypassing the Maginot Line through Belgium and the Ardennes. The Germans trapped Allied forces at Dunkirk and forced France's collapse. In 1941, Germany intervened in the Balkans after their ally Italy faltered, defeating Yugoslavia and Greece. In June, Hitler launched Operation Barbarossa, the largest invasion in history aimed at destroying the Soviet Union. German forces advanced rapidly, capturing vast territories, but the push toward Moscow stalled in winter. Germany's strategic situation worsened after it declared war on the United States in December 1941 following Pearl Harbor. The drive for oil in the Caucasus ended in disaster at Stalingrad in February 1943, a turning point as German forces were decisively defeated. From then on, Germany fought defensively on both fronts. Allied landings in Italy in 1943 and in Normandy on June 6, 1944 opened new fronts. Despite Rommel's warnings, deception operations convinced much of the German high command that the landings would come at Calais, leaving Normandy underdefended. As the Soviets launched Operation Bagration, shattering Army Group Center, Romania and Bulgaria defected to the Allies. In December 1944, Hitler gambled on a counter-offensive in the Ardennes, the Battle of the Bulge, but lack of fuel and supplies doomed the effort. By early 1945, Germany was collapsing. The Soviets advanced from the east while the Western Allies crossed the Rhine. Berlin fell to the Red Army in May, and Germany surrendered unconditionally on May 8, 1945. The war ended with the destruction of Nazi Germany, the loss of millions of lives, and Europe reshaped under Allied occupation.